Before Saul ever became king, the people of ancient Israel lived in a constant state of uncertainty. They were organized as tribes rather than a nation, each group protecting itself with little long-term coordination. Leadership appeared only in moments of crisis and disappeared once danger passed. This system worked when threats were small and temporary, but it failed when enemies became organized and permanent. Surrounding powers like the Philistines had standing armies advanced, weapons and clear command structures. In contrast, Israel relied on memory, faith, and temporary leaders. Fear slowly replaced confidence. Villages were vulnerable, trade was unsafe, and survival felt fragile. The people began to believe that faith alone was no longer enough. They wanted visible strength and permanent authority. A king became the symbol of security they thought they needed. This demand did not come from ambition, but from fear. They wanted to look like the nations around them. Because those nations appeared stable and powerful, this moment marks a critical shift. Leadership was no longer about guidance in crisis, but control in everyday life. A king would stand above tribes, unify them, and fight for them. Yet this decision carried a cost the people did not fully understand. Kingship requires obedience, structure, and patience, not just courage. When Saul was chosen, he fit the image perfectly. Tall, strong, and outwardly impressive, he looked like a leader people could trust. But appearance does not equal readiness. Saul had not grown into leadership gradually, he was elevated suddenly. The weight of expectation pressed on him immediately. He became responsible not only for battles, but for identity, unity, and continuity. This transition placed enormous pressure on a man still discovering who he was. Saul's rise reveals a society experimenting with power before understanding responsibility. The people wanted safety, but safety demanded discipline. They wanted protection, but protection required sacrifice. And Saul stood at the center of this contradiction. Chosen to answer fear rather than vision, his story begins not with ambition or cruelty, but with uncertainty, a leader shaped by public demand rather than inner clarity. And this imbalance set the foundation for everything that followed. When Saul first stepped into kingship, his rule began with cautious hope rather than confidence. He did not seize authority aggressively. Instead, he hesitated, unsure of his own place. Early victories against enemies brought relief to the people and temporary calm to Saul himself. Military success made him appear capable and strong. Yet these moments of triumph did not remove his inner uncertainty. Saul relied heavily on reassurance from the crowd and from religious authority to confirm his worth. Each victory raised expectations rather than easing pressure. The people now expected protection, consistency, and decisive action. Saul learned quickly that kingship was not a single role, but many at once. He was expected to be a warrior, judge, symbol, and unifier. These demands pulled him in different directions. Moments of courage were followed by doubt, moments of leadership followed by retreat. Saul's confidence depended on response rather than principle. Praise strengthened him. Criticism weakened him. This emotional dependence shaped his decision-making. Instead of long-term planning, Saul often reacted to immediate pressure. Early campaigns succeeded because enemies were surprised and disorganized, not because Saul had mastered strategy. As stability began to form, Saul felt the weight of permanence settle in. Leadership was no longer about winning battles, but about maintaining order between them, and this is where cracks appeared. Saul struggled with patience, waiting for guidance and trusting processes that moved slower than fear. His need for control grew alongside his insecurity. Success made him visible, but not secure. The crown gave authority, but not inner calm. And as Saul's reputation grew, so did his anxiety, because every action now carried judgment, comparison, and expectation. His early reign therefore becomes a fragile balance between ability and fear, outward strength masking inward instability, the appearance of control hiding a growing need for approval. This stage of Saul's life shows how early success can delay collapse without preventing it. Because unresolved insecurity does not disappear with victory, it waits for pressure to expose it. As Saul's reign continued, the tension between obedience and authority moved to the center of his leadership. Kingship demanded decisiveness, while guidance demanded patience. And Saul struggled to live in this space. Waiting felt like weakness. To him, silence felt like loss of control. When pressure increased, Saul began to act before clarity arrived. His most critical mistakes were not driven by rebellion, but by fear of delay, fear of appearing weak, and fear of losing the people's support. Saul believed that authority meant action even when restraint was required. This misunderstanding slowly eroded trust. Moments where patience could have preserved stability instead became moments of impulsive control. Saul tried to manage outcomes rather than processes, choosing speed over alignment. These choices revealed an inner conflict that never resolved. Saul wanted to obey, but also wanted to rule independently. He wanted approval, but also control. This divided motivation produced inconsistent leadership. Each compromise weakened his confidence rather than strengthening it. When confronted with consequences, Saul defended his actions by pointing to circumstances and pressure, not because he lacked honesty, but because he lacked inner certainty. Responsibility felt heavy, and constant judgment felt unavoidable. Obedience, in his mind, became conditional rather than foundational. This shift marked a turning point. Leadership no longer rested on trust, but on justification. Saul's authority became fragile because it relied on explanation rather than alignment. And once trust begins to fracture, it rarely breaks all at once. It fades gradually through hesitation, rationalization, and avoidance. Saul's story in this phase reveals how leadership collapses not through a single act of defiance, but through repeated attempts to control fear. His mistakes were not loud but cumulative, and each one narrowed his capacity to recover. This stage exposes a truth often overlooked. Authority without inner discipline becomes reactive, and obedience without patience becomes performance. Saul stood between these forces, unable to integrate them, and the cost of this imbalance would soon become unavoidable. When David entered Saul's world, the conflict was not immediate, but internal. David did not challenge Saul directly, yet his presence exposed everything Saul feared about himself. David represented confidence without force, patience without hesitation, and loyalty without insecurity. Where Saul sought approval, David earned trust. This contrast unsettled Saul deeply. Praise given to David felt like loss to Saul. Comparison replaced leadership and suspicion replaced judgment. Saul began to see threats where none existed, victories that once brought pride now brought anxiety. Every success around him felt like a reminder of his own instability. Saul's leadership shifted from protection to preservation. He focused less on governing and more on guarding his position. This change marked the beginning of psychological isolation. Fear narrowed his perspective, and loyalty became conditional. Moments of clarity were followed by episodes of anger and regret. Saul recognized his decline, yet felt powerless to stop it. Authority magnified his fear instead of resolving it. The crown no longer provided security, it amplified vulnerability. Saul's mind became divided between affection and hostility, restraint and impulse. Leadership under fear became unpredictable. Decisions were shaped by emotion rather than principle. This instability spread beyond Saul himself, affecting the court, the army, and the people. Trust weakened, unity fractured, and leadership lost coherence. Saul's struggle was no longer against enemies, but against loss of control over himself. The tragedy of this phase lies in awareness without recovery. Saul understood what was slipping away yet lacked the inner structure to restore balance. His decline shows how power can deepen insecurity when identity remains unresolved, and how leadership collapses first internally before it ever fails publicly. As Saul's reign moved toward its end, clarity did not return, but desperation increased. Guidance felt distant, silence felt heavy, and fear replaced direction. Saul no longer trusted processes or people fully. Decisions became urgent rather than thoughtful. Isolation deepened as confidence faded. The authority he once struggled to protect now felt hollow. His final years reveal a leader searching for certainty after losing alignment. Desperation pushed him toward actions driven by anxiety rather than wisdom. This stage does not portray Saul as cruel, but as overwhelmed, burdened by responsibility he was never prepared to carry alone. The collapse of his leadership was not sudden, but gradual, marked by exhaustion, confusion, and emotional withdrawal. Saul's death closed a chapter defined not by tyranny, but by tragedy. His story ends without resolution because it was shaped by imbalance rather than intention. Yet Saul's legacy remains deeply instructive. He stands as a warning against choosing leaders based on appearance rather than readiness, and against granting authority without building inner discipline. Saul teaches that power does not remove fear, it reveals it. That leadership without identity becomes reactive, and that insecurity, when magnified by authority, can destabilize entire systems. His life challenges simple judgments, reminding us that failure often begins with pressure, not rebellion, and that societies play a role in shaping the leaders they demand. Saul's reign shows that leadership is not only about strength or obedience, but about inner stability, patience, and trust. His story endures because it reflects a universal truth. Authority cannot replace character, and position cannot compensate. For unresolved fear, Saul remains a figure of warning and empathy, illustrating the cost of elevating responsibility faster than readiness, and the lasting consequences of leadership formed by fear rather than clarity.